Hello and welcome to another edition of the Civ Battle Royale audio narration. My name is Dawkinzz and let's get right into it. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Civ Battle Royale Mark II. We are now at part 69. And I am your narrator, Leyumak. I hope I pronounced that correctly for you. I'm narrating this part blindly, so I have no idea what's going to come in this part. Last part we saw the Boers decimating the Buccaneer-held parts of Africa, Vietnam grinding against Sibir and Australia, Finland trading land with Sweden and Sibir, and Sweden reconquering their lands from the Boers. If this part is even half as exciting as the previous one, then we are in for one hell of a ride. Just like most of the game, the Boers top the power rankings due to their immense strength in military as well as a tech lead only matched by the Inuit and Korea. In previous parts, they also woke up from their slumber and have beaten down on Sparta, Sweden, and the Buccaneers, although they have been losing momentum in Europe and have lost a few cities to Sweden. They are indisputably the most powerful nation on the entire cylinder. Here you can see the beautiful city map made by some of our resident cartographers, Malsistra and Laxoraxoriskel. If you look at that map, you can easily see the conquest by the Boers in Africa and Brazil conquering some of the last parts of Chile. However, if you look even closer, you can see that Tibet has founded a second city in the ruins of the recently destroyed city of Kiev, which officially confirms that Tibet is no longer a city-state. They are, however, still very small and will most likely lose their new city to Sibir, who they are at war with, however, I think, or something. I don't know, there's a lot of wars going on. With that being said, let's jump right into the action. Well, you can immediately ignore what I just said about Tibet losing their second city to Sibir, since Tibet just peaced out with Sibir. That means that Tibet will most likely stop being a city-state for at least some time. The gods of Border Gore are pleased with this outcome. You can also see that Vietnam made peace with Kumcha Khan of Sibir, ending one half of the meat grinder on their border. On the now peaceful border between Vietnam and Sibir, Sibir has reconquered Bamda from their Korean overlords. However, the city will most likely not stay Siberian for long, as Sejong of Korea still has 3 XCOM squads nearby the city, all of them basically at full health, while Sibir has a much weaker army of paratroopers and power armor infantry. You can also see the massive difference between the Vietnamese and Korean lands and the Sibir lands. Sibir, I will keep messing that up. While Vietnam and Korea has almost completely carpeted their land with soldiers, the Siberian army is scattered around their lands and not really present around Bamda or Wurpatal. It seems like the Trung sisters of Vietnam chose to make peace a bit too early, seeing as all Sibir cities on their border are at yellow health at most. If they stayed in this war a little longer, they could have most likely conquered some of those cities. This does mean that the Korean XCOM units and the Afghan paratroopers can conquer the almost destroyed cities with relative ease. It also seems like Sibir has big army around here, but if you look closer, a lot of it is workers and outdated tanks and artillery. All by all, Kumcha Khan of Sibir is in quite a predicament in the south of his empire. In the Middle East, Artashat, Kumcha Khan's last remaining city in the region, has almost 0 health. It will, however, most likely not be conquered anytime soon, as the Ethiopian peacekeepers occupy every last tile surrounding Artashat, Gyumri, and Gaza. If one of those peacekeepers next to Artashat moves out of the way, then the city can be conquered by Afghan paratroopers, but the city will not switch hands for now. Also, some cities in the Vietnamese Persia are damaged and the land isn't carpeted, so if Ethiopia attacks right now, they might grab some cities from Vietnam. Meanwhile, in America, Sam Houston of Texas reconquers their capital of Austin with their second-to-last melee unit. It is almost certain that they will lose it to Mexico again very soon. However, this also means that 2 former city-states lost their city-state status, namely Tibet and Texas, say that 3 times fast, and only Japan, Hawaii, and Sparta are left. Guadalajara is also conquered by the Buccaneers, and it doesn't seem likely that it will be reconquered by Mexico anytime soon, seeing as the city is protected by mountains and only has a small gap between them to the north. The Buccaneers do not have a visible army nearby, however, so the fate of the city is not certain yet. Back to Vietnam, Henry Parks of Australia has sent an XCOM squad to land in a Vietnamese citadel nearby Vagan, primed to capture the originally Philippine city. The Vietnamese are also ready to capture Cebu with some embarked drone UAVs nearby. I believe this is the first time we are seeing Australian XCOM units. This is going to get a little crazy given their reach in the Pacific. The Boers attacked Buccaneer West Africa last part and have quickly blitzed the area. However, they will most likely have trouble keeping the coastal cities due to the giant fleet made by Henry Morgan of the Buccaneers. The Buccaneers have also stationed a nuclear missile in the island city of Cumana, ready to nuke the Boers at any moment. This won't be the first time that Henry Morgan ordered a nuclear bombing of West Africa, as he also completely irradiated the now Boer lands of Mali. In strategic mode, you can see the fallout made as a result of the nuclear bombings much better. This means that you can see the complete destruction of Central and Eastern Europe. From Messine to Krakow, from Antioch to Zibo, almost all lands are covered in nuclear fallout. Also, if you look very closely, the last Roman ballista can be spotted in the Sibir lands nearby Morelia, unscathed by the nuclear explosions surrounding it. I guess that is Kaiser's Legion. In the middle of the nuclear almost apocalypse, a small spot of light can be spotted. The small defensive state of Tibet has been founded in the nearby old Soviet city of Kiev, which was completely destroyed by nuclear bombings. The city has futuristic infrastructure left behind by the Finns, but the Tibetans insist on using their cannon from the Renaissance to defend the city, as is tradition. Buccaneer Iberia is mostly unscathed by the war going on just to the south of it, except Braga and Goa losing health. The region is almost completely empty, however, except for the airplanes in the south, most likely bombing the Boers' lands and units. If the Boers decide to attack it, it will most likely be conquered in a matter of turns, but for now, the Boers are content with just scouting the area with a hover tank to see if there are any hidden units anywhere nearby. Hint, and spoilers, there aren't any. Pedro II of Brazil has almost completely conquered Chile. All that is left are Arica and Talca in southern Patagonia, protected by the Andes, and Iquique on the South Georgian islands, west of Capiapo. All Brazil needs to do is send a melee unit to the other side of the mountain range, and both cities are ripe for the taking. This may very well be the last part for Bernard O'Higgins. In Inuit Kamchatka, the war with Yakutia is still heavily visible. Almost the entire peninsula is covered in fallout, and both Igloolik and Sanarairaq are in the red. The Yakutians have no units nearby, so they will stay Inuit for now. The Inuits also have 6 stealth bombers stationed nearby the peninsula, so if some of the Yakutians do show up, they will be dealt with anyway. There's also a lot of fallout in Australian lands. The former Kimberley lands of Rubibi and Kalumburu have been nuked, as well as Sulawesi and Western New Guinea. Vietnam is mostly unscathed in the region, but the Trungs of Vietnam have lost my son. Also of note, the Kimberley have militarized, having 5 planes and 5 missiles/nukes stationed in Simhapura. There are also planes in Makassar. Are they planning to join the war between Australia and Vietnam? Whatever side they join on, they will most likely be completely conquered and destroyed. In the midst of the Australian waters, a quarantine zone has been set up around the former remains of Laguna, devastated by nuclear radiation. Here is the previous shot again, but now in beautiful colors and 3D. An Australian Prime Minister has landed nearby Batam and ready to govern. Almost all cities near Borneo, and northern Sulawesi have almost 0 HP, as also seen in the previous slide. My prediction about Sibir losing cities to Korea and Afghanistan has come true. Nishapur has been conquered by Afghan paratrooper, and Yelmadanga Buru, I believe I pronounced that correctly, narrator, thank you, has been overtaken by a Korean XCOM squad. Samarkand, Herat, and Rusadirha are also all very weak, and if the Koreans or Afghans want to conquer more, those cities are the places to be. I would also like to have a moment to appreciate the comeback that Afghanistan is making. They truly are the graveyard of empires, unless that empire is Vietnam. A look at the Korean core shows that Korea has not carpeted all that much. Most cities are surrounded by a ring of defensive troops, but a lot of the places between the cities are empty. This will most likely not be a problem, however, because Korea has stationed 8 drone fighters in Ambarchik, and probably some more in other cities. Most of these cities are close to the border with Yakutia, so it seems as if Korea is planning another attack on Tiger Dakan. Using their giant fleet, the Buccaneers have reconquered some of the coastal cities that the Boer menace have conquered. They also weakened some inland cities. The Boers will most likely take them back, but it seems as if their carpet is fading, as they only have troops on the borders with the Buccaneers and one inland as far as we can see. Is this a sign that the military dominance of the Orange Menace is fading? Besides their West African holdings, the Buccaneers also conquer the previously Spartan city of Messene from the Boers. The Swedes cannot be happy with this, seeing as if they were very close to reconquering it. Cumae is still undefended, and Gustavus of Sweden can most likely take it back. It is a sad day for Texas. Their capital has been lost again, and the only melee unit left is almost dead and in Mexican borders. The last city is also almost destroyed. It seems as if Texas is at its end. One thing is for sure, the Alamo will never be forgotten. The Buccaneers also keep Guadalajara and are very close to getting Ciudad Juarez. All by all, a good turn for the Buccaneers. There is also some very interesting and exciting news on the message screen, but I guess we'll just ignore it and not talk about it at all, or on another slide or something. Ciudad Juarez gets another reign of nuclear devastation though. Dios mío. Semiramis finds out that the Inuit leader Ekenik is planning an attack against Iceland. Most of these reports of planned attacks are false, so it is to be taken with a grain of salt. But if Ekenik does decide to attack Iceland, that might mean that Greenland will most likely be lost, if not the entirety of Iceland. Also, if Greenland is conquered, then the ice sheet fleet in the Arctic can finally escape its prison of the north, which means that the Inuit finally have one of the world's largest navies at their disposal to wreak havoc around the world. The Buccaneers still have some nuclear missiles left to throw on the Boers, but that's most likely not the largest problem that the Boers have right now. I will stop keeping you waiting and keep this slide short so I can move on to the next slide. You'll see why. And here it is, ladies and gentlemen. Some might call this the suicide of the century, following the cylinder's rough history of seemingly innocuous against all odds wars. France versus Iceland and Byzantium versus Finland. Has Ethiopia decided to end themselves via the Boers? On a more serious note, this declaration of war seems very stupid, as the Boers have been dominating power over Africa, hell, even the world for the better part of the game, but if you look closer you can see that something's missing, namely the army of the Boers. West Africa seems almost completely void of Boer units, and with the Buccaneers fighting back heartily, the Boers are actually probably not able to completely steamroll Ethiopia. Also, Sweden is beating back the Boers in Europe. Adding to that, Brazil and Sibir also declare war, both very strong nations with very large armies and a huge amount of air power. And if you remember, in the previous part, a huge Brazilian fleet was crossing the Atlantic. The Brazilian were made of because of that, I guess. Okay, but it was just a part of a big plan to restrain the Boers. I would like to call this war/series of war the Orange Containment Program. On the northwestern front, Ethiopia definitely has the upper hand, together with the Buccaneers. Let's see if that's also the case on the other fronts of this massive war. Do not judge a book by its cover. On the eastern front, both nations have their lands fully carpeted. However, the Boers are in a large tech lead, so they have the upper hand on that part. Also important, Ethiopia has a large air force at its front, including at least one atomic bomb. It is also important to remember Ethiopia's unique ability, which is that units have a plus 20% combat bonus when fighting units from a civilization with more cities than Ethiopia, which is definitely the case in this war. But even with all of these bonuses and seemingly advantages to Ethiopia, I still think that the Boers will win this war, unless other superpowers join in, which I'm not sure who would. On the Indian Oceanic front, the situation is much more even. Both nations have a large fleet, but a large part of the Boer fleet consists of empty carriers, very outdated caravels, and hover tanks. I'm sorry if I sound a bit biased against the Boers, but I just love it that these relatively small nations try to stand up against the definitive power on the cylinder. I hope that they will win this war, even though it is most likely not going to happen. The Ethiopians are not alone with their attack on the Boers. From the Atlantic, a Brazilian fleet approaches Boerfrika and is already heavily damaging Kumasi and Messina. It also seems as if the entire Boer navy is on the other side of Africa, as only a hover tank can be seen here. The rest of the Brazilian Navy is shown here, as well as the rest of the Boer Navy. It's pretty obvious that the Boers will dominate this naval battle, but not before Brazil uses its atomic bombs on the core of the Boers. Brazil will very likely be defeated by the Boers here, but not without putting up a hell of a fight. Immediately, the former Zulu capital of Ulundi is nuked. This is very close to the Boer capital, and it seems like a devastating blow to their core. It seems as if the nuke was a waste, however, because only a few improvements are pillaged, and the city is still in green health, and there doesn't seem to be a loss of units. All is good tactically in the grim calculus of wartime tactics until you realize that the blast caused the deaths of many millions and millions of people. It is discovered that Pedro doesn't just want the Boers to suffer, he also wants to get rid of the immensely powerful Ashanti pikemen. This is completely understandable, seeing the massive influence the pikeman has over the game. A view of the strategic map shows the nuclear devastation in Boer West Africa. Some of this fallout has probably been here since the horrible nuking of Mali by the Buccaneers, but most of it is probably by the Buccaneers, Ethiopia, and the Boers themselves. It is clear that whoever comes out on top of this, they will inherit a scorched earth. A newcomer to Spartan political affairs, a man of Ayyubid origin, Sir Malik of Divin, sits on his throne in Sparta, now known as the Divinish Empire. His empire gives refuge to the last units of civs that have been defeated, like Hunnic workers, a French Great War infantry in Gellius, and also a Timorid Gellius. Sparta just made peace with their faraway enemy Korea, making sure they will survive another day. Korea still holds on to their cities in the north and don't seem close to losing them to Sibir. However, in Mongolian lands, some Boer units can be spotted. These units can be used to attack Sibir right in their core. The Buccaneers also take Cumae from the Boers, another former Swedish city that will no longer be Swedish, and I probably mispronounced. Messine is under attack by 2 Boer units, and it looks like they might succeed with capturing the city, although they most likely will not hold it for very long, as it is right on the border with the Buccaneers and Sweden. They also retake Timbuktu in West Africa and bring 4 cities to 0 health and 2 to red health. They still have 2 nuclear missiles left to nuke West Africa with, as if it isn't irradiated enough already. Speaking about irradiated land, Mexico is completely broken in the south. All 5 cities pictured are in red health and are surrounded by fallout and pillaged land. Austin especially is dangerously close to being captured, either by a Buccaneer advanced destroyer or a Texan Great War infantry. And if one of your cities is in danger of being captured by a Great War infantry, then you know you have a problem. The inland cities are pretty safe for now, but if the Buccaneers send some land units, then Mexico should really be afraid, especially if the Blackfoot also join in. Northern Australia is nicely healing from the nuking it just recently encountered. The workers are working hard to get rid of the fallout and to repair the infrastructure, and the cities are almost at full health. Australia should still be wary because another nuking hides behind every corner. In the war between Sibir and Afghanistan, both of their Middle Eastern cities are in the deep red. They will not be conquered anytime soon due to the Ethiopian peacekeepers, but if those peacekeepers decide to defend their home country in Africa, then those cities will fall in an instant. The Eternal City has fallen. Mampang has switched sides multiple sides in the Battle Royale, but not once has it been through conquest. This city has been gifted at the end of wars many times, and has been in the hands of the Ashanti, Morocco, Mali, Ethiopia, and maybe Carthage. I'm not quite sure, it's been a long time, it's part 69, Christ. That has come to an end. The unconquerable city has been brutally conquered by the Boers, and it will stay in their hands in the foreseeable future. Zabid, Adwa, Makali, and Lalblilele have all been brought down to 0 HP in just one turn by the Boers. They probably won't fall in the coming turn, but the Ethiopian defense can't last forever. It does seem as if the Boers have been focused completely on attacking the cities, as most Ethiopian units still have full health. Expect a lot of flipping in this region. The Ethiopian fleet descends on Harrismith, but the Boer fleet is also still very present in this region. It's anyone's guess if this city will be conquered or if it will stay Boer. The Boers use their peacekeeper units in Mongolia for the exact opposite purpose, conquering Mandalgovi from Sibir. Sibir immediately reconquers it, but this will most likely not be the last of the Boer peacekeepers to attack the Siberian land. Here you can see the large squadron of peacekeepers in Mongolia on their way to Sibir. Some of them are already close to Bamda, which will probably fall to them in the upcoming turn. These ex-peacekeepers are now on their way to be a huge menace to the Siberian Corps, but also to Korea and Afghanistan, who are trying to conquer Sibir for themselves. Some rubbles have also broken out between the Boer and the Brazilian peacekeepers near Konu in Yakutia. They actually did it, the absolute madmen! Texas uses their last privateer to reconquer Austin again, and there are no visible Mexican melee units nearby, which means that it will stay Texan for now. Let's hope for Texas that they will keep this city, as well as Laredo, just for the sake of revenge. The Ethiopian offense is already dying out in the north. They only conquered Tangier and have only really damaged one other city, which was theirs to begin with. This attack now seems to be a big mistake, and the Boers were much stronger than Haile Selassie of Ethiopia expected. I'll never get his name right, just forget about it. Some Boer ships come across a fleet of Brazilian units mostly embarked. These Brazilian units were probably on their way to the Boer Antarctic colonies, but have been intercepted by the Boers. The Brazilians have a larger navy here, but it consists mostly of embarked units, so the Boers will probably sink their ships before the Antarctic colonies fall. Harrismith and Potchefstroom take damage, but it is mostly superficial. The Ethiopians have pushed back some of the Boer units, making sure that the cities don't flip in the coming turn. This attack by Ethiopia was probably a mistake and has made a lot of people very angry and has widely been regarded as a bad move. An Inuit missile cruiser stops near the Vietnamese harbor of Pascarde. 2 nuclear missiles are stationed here, and as far as I know, the Inuit are only at war with Yakutia, so why would they send missiles here? I do not know. Maybe they are planning an attack on Israel. It would surprise me, to say the least. In this beautiful shot of the Korean Corps, you can see that they still haven't carpeted yet. They have, however, completely carpeted both the Chinese Sea and the Sea of Japan. They do not need to carpet their land anyway, since they are so far ahead in tech that they don't need a large army, and their only current enemy is too far away to attack them. When me and my siblings used to fight over toys when we were much younger, my mom used to put the toy we were fighting over high on the shelf that we couldn't get to. That way we stopped fighting over stuff, because if we fought, no one would get it. The same thing happened to the Boers and the Buccaneers. They fought over Timbuktu so much that they literally nuked the city out of existence. No one has made any progress by doing this, and it just means that someone like Tibet can settle another city there. The Buccaneers, however, do reconquer Marrakesh and Ciudad del Carmen. Tangier is reconquered by the Boers, and most border towns have been brought to zero, or at most, red health. This war was definitely a huge mistake on Ethiopia's part, and Sibir and Brazil probably agree with that. All Ethiopian cities make it through this turn, but most cities on the border are surrounded by Boer hover tanks. The domination of Ethiopia is surely not far away, looking at the destruction of everything in their core. Paul Kruger of the Boers takes Mandalgovi again, this time without resistance from Sibir. It's not like there is too much border gore in Siberia already, right? Ethiopia can't recapture Tangier, but they do conquer Utik and are close to conquering Fez. On this front, Haile Selassie of Ethiopia is making gains, but that can't be said about their other fronts. All Ethiopian cities make it through this turn, but most cities on the border are surrounded by Boer hover tanks. The domination of Ethiopia is surely not far away, looking at the destruction of everything in their core. I think I got a little deja vu right there. Ethiopia does have a large air force in their capital, including an atomic bomb primed to fall on Boer lands. In the middle of this horrible and bloody war, one group of people does not suffer. The Ashanti pikeman still travels the Boer lands as a sort of traveling circus. From far and wide, people come look at these people from another time, and the pikemen don't mind. They get paid richly and are national celebrities in the most powerful countries in the world. They do not notice the war. They expected less people to come to visit, but they are more popular now than ever. It seems as if people come see them to get away from the futuristic, inhumane war. They do have one disadvantage compared to before. Due to Ethiopia attacking the mighty Draka, Ethiopians residing in Boer lands are heavily discriminated against and also can't visit the Ashanti pikemen. But that doesn't even begin to outweigh the millions of people that have already died in this war. Boers, Ethiopians, soldiers, civilians, they are all people. The Ethiopian attack on Harrismith basically died out, and the island is still Boer, and will be for the time to come. The rest of Brazil's navy closes in on Boer lands, hoping to weaken the mighty Nraka. Their navy doesn't even begin to compare to the giganticness of the Boer navy, but they will put up a good fight. The Buccaneers and Brazil, age-old enemies. This war against a common enemy has brought them close together. A Buccaneer fleet is attacking Bamako, while the Brazilian fleet from the former slide is moving in on the former Congolese cities. West Africa is the only part of the Boer Empire that is not carpeted, and so it is heavily focused on by the Buccaneers and Ethiopia. Austin is still not retaken, and there are no Mexican melee units nearby except for a Marine protecting a great artist in a citadel. The Buccaneers are readying some land units near Guadalajara, most likely to go to Ciudad Juarez through the small gap in the mountains. If they come through, most Mexican cities are ripe for the taking and will be a good addition to the Buccaneer Empire. Finland is recovering from their wars against Sweden and Sibir. They are rebuilding their carpet, they are repairing their infrastructure, and they are trying their best to get all of that hideous fallout. There was one stumbling block. Their previous city of Kiev was destroyed, and they were planning on resettling it, but the area has been claimed by some ancient people from the Himalayas. They could attack them, but when Sibir attacked Tibet, Vietnam came to the rescue of the mountain state, and Finland can't try to take that risk right after those two destructive wars they had. Sweden is also recuperating from their war. The Boers are driven out of Europe by Sweden and the Buccaneers, and the fighting has basically stopped. Now is the time to rebuild, regrow, and then revenge. Both Chilean mountain fortresses are still not conquered. The Brazilians can't seem to get a melee unit over the Andes, even though if they did, it would mean the end of Chile. We know that the most of their fleet is fighting the Boers right now, but just one melee ship is enough to conquer both cities. But Brazil isn't exactly known for fighting wars good. Pedro II of Brazil did, however, take the last Chilean island of Iquique, famous for being the closest to the submarine of the all-knowing Babylonians. That's you guys. We must hope that there is not too much culture in the Iquique, I guess that's how you pronounce it, because if the borders expand too much, we may have to relocate the submarine just like in Mark 1. A shot of Inuit, Texas shows that it is relatively empty. There is a lot of infrastructure here and also very large cities with populations in the 30s. In the east, the former American and Canadian cities are much less developed, Boston and Montreal only having 2 population. Some Mexican and Australian units can be spotted walking around, gathering surveillance for their country. The leader of the Inuit, Ekanik, is planning on attacking Mirwais Hotak of Afghanistan. Mirwais has had it bad enough for the last few parts, but the Inuit are too far away to do anything in a war against Afghanistan, unless that's what that missile cruiser with the nukes a few slides ago was there for. Back to an old war, Australia versus Vietnam. It is still a grinding stalemate, and no cities have switched hands since the previous time we looked at this war. It is for the good of both nations if they make peace now, so they can both rebuild for a following war, but where's the fun in that? We want blood. Northwestern Australia has completely rebuilt itself since the nuking and is being carpeted once again. I would like to use this slide as an appreciation for the beautiful outback created by our very own TPangolin, I think. It truly made Australia a more interesting and beautiful place in this game. Aotearoa, or more recently known as New Zealand. The former Maori Empire was situated here, and there are still reminders of their culture throughout the islands. Although the autocratic Australian government is trying to integrate it completely into the rest of the nation by sending quote-unquote pure-blood Australians there. Hopefully for the Maori, their legacy will live on forever, especially on that fallout-induced mountain next to Sydney. The Inuit send 2 XCOM squads, I believe their first ones, to Yakusha, ready to take the weakened cities there. Finally, maybe we'll see some progress. Yakusha was once on the top spot to conquer the rest of the nations, but they were too pacifistic and were eclipsed by other, more aggressive nations. It's a bit sad that they were recently beaten by Korea, the civ that was at the bottom spot of the power rankings once. A sad story indeed. Speaking about falling from the top, here are the former Canadian territories, now Inuit. Here you can see another Inuit XCOM squad, proving that indeed they can finally build them. Canada is another sad story, much like Yakutia. Canada was also number 1 in the power rankings for a short while, but unlike Yakutia, they weren't quiet. They attacked the Sioux and Texas and were expanding for a long while, but their neighbor, the Inuit, fastly outgrew them and defeated Canada in a series of crippling wars. The Buccaneers reconquer their first inland city from the Boers. They currently have quite a few land units near Rabat, so the push to reconquer Africa will probably continue, with Casablanca and Fez already almost down. The Boers are also relatively army-less in this area, most likely to the repeated nuking of the area by the Buccaneers and Ethiopia. Paul Kruger of the Boers shows that he definitely hates fun, and after trying to kill the Buccaneers is planning on attacking the Divinish Empire of Sparta. If he does, I think the backlash of the community, read Sir Malik, would be so big that they would just be completely razed from the map by everyone. Ethiopia reconquers Aswan, and Ethiopia and the Boers both have a lot of units in the territory of the other, but one big difference is that most Boer cities, except Dire Dawa and Mapang, are at full health, and almost all of the cities in the African part of Ethiopia are almost at 0 health, including their capital Addis Ababa, and I do spot a Boer paratrooper on the outskirts of it. Is this the end of Addis Ababa? In West Philadelphia, born and raised, West Africa, Marrakesh is conquered by the Boers for the umpteenth time. However, the Boers are losing ground in West Africa, and Ethiopia just sent a whole squadron of paratroopers over the borders and into Western Sahara, so that might mean the end of the Boer domination in the West. We end this part with a shot of the war that started the entire Second World War. Vietnam has a whole lot of drone fighters stationed in Hoi An, ready to bombard Indonesia. For a long time, northern Indonesia and the former Philippine lands have been in the red, but Vietnam hasn't been able to capitalize on it, although a huge army is currently embarking towards it, and I don't see much of an Australian resistance. But let's go on to the info addict slides. Israel has the least land, which is pretty obvious, but what surprises me is that the largest city-state, Hawaii, has more land than Armenia and Tibet, both not city-states. The Boers no longer have the largest army. Australia has overtaken them because of the war going on in the Boer lands. On third place is Vietnam. Ethiopia has about 1 million less soldiers than the Boers, which is a lot, but together with Sibir and Brazil, they have way more than the Boers, so this war can still go either way. Israel has the smallest army of all civs alive. No army smaller than several legally dead civs, including but not limited to the Ashanti, Rome, the Timurids, Burma, France, China, Morocco, Canada, and even the mystic Babylon himself, or itself. Truly sad. The Inuit have the most cities, but only one more than the number 2 Australia. The Boers are in third place, and Sibir is in fourth. All city-states are easily listed here, including Texas, having lost Austin again to Mexico. Mexico's Catholicism is still by far the largest religion, with Ethiopia's Oriental Orthodoxy coming second and Israel's Judaism coming third. On this final slide, you see the religion map, which shows which religion dominates where. Africa is almost completely Oriental Orthodox, Europe and the Middle East are Jewish, the steppes are Akatyu, and Southeast Asia and Australia are Buddhist. East and Northeast Asia is Shinto, including Alaska, and the Americas are Catholic. This was the Civ Battle Royale Part 69, narrated by my friend, the user LeUMach. Goodbye, everyone, and this has been Dawkinzz, I guess with another audio narration. This has gotten kind of awkward all of a sudden. But hey, thank you all very much. Up next is Burger Krieg with Part 70, which is really hard to believe, on Sunday. So thank you guys very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.